Hello and welcome to Killer Off-Road Hobbies. I'm your host Gary, and today we're doing a full review and my thoughts video on the Team K.O.R.H Dementor. So let's just dive into this. Let's get into what I think about the truck, the issues I had with the truck, and my overall thoughts. Now I did have to do a few basically home upgrades to get this thing to where I like it now, but this is a very fun truck, and I will tell you right now, this thing has loads and loads of power. And I want to congratulate Team K.O.R.H for like really putting an extra effort into trying to make this truck like tough, because this is their first release of this truck. This is the V1, if you want to call it that. You know, I'm not sure if they're going to come out with a V2 or just eventually, if it works out, you know, if they have a good release with all of this stuff, and because this is a new lineup for them, so I'm not sure if they're gonna have upgrade parts come out pretty soon or whatever, but there is a few things on this truck that need to be addressed. This truck is by no means perfect, but I don't think it's a bad truck at all. There were a few issues, we'll go over that, but let's just kind of dive into the truck. All right, so initially the body, while I thought it would be durable, I wasn't too fond of the look of it. So let's just pop it off of here. I'm not a huge fan of the look. It does look okay. I will say it looks okay. It doesn't look great. And as I've said before, at least it's not another, you know, Ford Raptor body put on an RC, because that seems to be the thing nowadays. But from the crashes and everything this thing has taken, there's only a few minor scratches on the top. The front has been bent up, you know, on top of the diff case and everything, and there's no real signs of it giving in to any of the damage it's taken. You know, it's taken it very, very well. There's no cracks, nothing like that. I did Gorilla Tape it like fairly well, but you know, even with Gorilla Tape, bodies that are gonna break will break. So this thing has been very durable, and while not being a huge fan of the design of it, I do think it looks okay, and it is definitely durable enough for a basher. So moving on to the truck, so many people have called this an Arrma outcast copy. Basically, you know, they're just like giving Team K.O.R.H, you know, a hard time about the design of this truck, because with the tires and the body, it does kind of resemble the Outcast a little bit. But when you get to the chassis, this little tower too is kind of reminiscent of the Outcast. But when you get to the chassis is completely different. I mean, you know, the chassis is far narrower. It's got bigger plastic wings on it. None of the bracing is the same, other than, like I said, this tower. The battery tray is different. While it is running a front pillow ball suspension, you know, the A-arms look different. Upper and lower A-arms look different. The rear A-arms look different. You know, the wheelie bar is definitely different. The rear wing mount is definitely different. The chassis bracing is different. So, I mean, this thing is pretty different. The tires are very similar. And like I said, it does look kind of like an Outcast because of the tires and the old school body. But when you start looking at the chassis, you know, almost everything nowadays runs a flat pan chassis with a center diff. So that's going to be like in almost everything you see, whether it's a truggy or a monster truck. So looking past that fact, here's a couple things, like pros and cons, I like about this truck. Okay, one huge pro to me is the ESC and motor combo. That motor combo has so much power. And I really like the setup out of the box of the ESC. I don't even want to change it. I really like the setup of that. So it has plenty of power out of the box. A con would be, while the steering servo does have the power to turn the tires, you do want to tighten down your servo saver. And I mean like tighten it down all the way, because it seems to not have the torque to turn the tires. But once you tighten down that servo saver, it has plenty of torque to turn the tires. So it completely changes how this thing handles. I just wish that they would do that out of the box, so it's not something that you have to do, because it is kind of hard to get in there to tighten it. I mean, you can take the 7 screws, like you have to take the drag link off, you know, for the steering, and then the 6 screws underneath, and then you can just turn it over and kind of tighten it by hand. But I would like to see them address that issue, because it is an issue. I mean, this thing turns horrible out of the box, but once you tighten down the servo saver, and according to Team K.O.R.H, it still has plenty of give in there to protect your servo, even tightened down all the way. So I would really like to see them just kind of do that as a quality control thing. Just start tightening those down before they ship these trucks out. Now, another pro and con about this truck would have to be the tires. The tires are so soft that they balloon very, very badly, and that is a contributing factor for sure to the poor handling out of the box. Now, what I did was I taped and vented these tires, and now they're perfect. Now I feel like they're how they should be for sure. So that would be something to think about if you end up getting one of these kits, is to I would just do that as soon as I pull it out of the box. I would go ahead, vent the tires, tape the hole on the inside of the wheel. That way it seems to help. I'm not exactly sure why that helps, but it does help a lot. Moving along, another con definitely for this truck, as anybody who's watched my bash videos will see, is the rear chassis brace. Now, I upgraded mine. So I ordered this ST Racing Outcast rear chassis brace, aluminum chassis brace. This is the anodized red, comes in several different colors, and I did have to do some machining work to this. So if you want to see that, you can watch my previous bash videos where I talk about that. But I did have to do a little bit of work to get that in there, but that seems to have solved my chassis brace issue on the rear. I did unfortunately end up bending my chassis pretty badly and bending my rear drive shaft. But all I did was, pull the rear end off, put the chassis in a vise, bend it back straight, and then I did this little upgrade, and it was perfectly fine. This thing is now on the new chassis, and thank you again, Chris from HRP, for sending me all the parts that I broke on this thing. So just to kind of go over the list of parts I broke, I wouldn't say this is broken. Like, I bent it back straight, well, almost straight. I didn't even hit it with a hammer or anything. I could have fine-tuned it a little bit, but like I said, I just put this thing in a vise and bent it back straight, and then the truck was ready to go again. The fact that I changed out the chassis, I could have kept running this chassis. Just because it bent back here didn't mean it was junk. You can straighten them out and run them. So that's something I did several times with my Creighton V1. I bent the chassis several times. I bent the rear shock tower several times, and I would just pull it out, put it against the concrete, hammer it, and good as new. So I did bend the chassis, and as I said, the rear chassis brace did fail on me, like completely, just snapped in half. So I have that upgrade, which I went ahead and changed over. They did send me a new rear chassis brace, but this worked out good enough to where I just swapped it over to the new chassis. And while I was swapping everything to the new chassis, I discovered that the front chassis brace, top chassis brace, was broken. This goes right here and goes to this screw. Here, I'll get you guys in here. So this goes right there, connects to that screw into the top right there. And it was broken right there, so I took it out. And unfortunately, these things are on back order, so it hasn't come in yet. So this truck will be down until I get that chassis brace. So I would say the chassis brace issue needs to be addressed for sure. But let's just kind of take an overlook of this thing. I mean, it's set up well, people, and it is not an exact replica of the Outcast. If you know what the chassis of the Outcast looks like, it might look similar, but it is quite a bit different at the same time. And right here is where I vented the tires. Let's keep going with the pros and cons. Okay, so while they seriously reinforce this rear wing right here, you know, they put steel supports in there and everything, and they did put a big steel piece in here for the wheelie bar, but unfortunately these ends just tend to bend really easily, by the way. So that would be another con, is that bends. But I would say a pro is that wing mount is just incredibly reinforced. Now, did that contribute to the failure of this center chassis brace? I would say absolutely, because that's so rigid, something has to give. The weakest point's going to give, and the weakest point before was this this rear chassis brace. Now that I have a nice aluminum chassis brace in there, I think this is going to be pretty much good to go, and the failure point now, I think, was that front chassis brace. So I would like to see from Team K.O.R.H some upgrades, especially for the chassis bracing on this. Other than that, I haven't had any issues with the shocks. I haven't even tuned the shocks. The shocks, I like the way they're set up out of the box. I haven't had any issues with the A-arms. I did have a pillow ball pop out, but that happens, you know, I've had that happen on my Arrma vehicles, so that wasn't a big deal. I just put it back in. All in all, I would say this thing is a solid kit. And while it does have some issues, I think it's a really good starting point, and I would love to see the aftermarket kind of start thinking about making parts for this thing. I'd love to see HR, you know, hot racing, you know, start making chassis bracing for this thing. You know, I'd love to see a couple companies like that go ahead and jump in there. Maybe even RPM start, you know, making some stuff for this thing, bumpers and whatnot. I mean, I think that would be awesome, and I think it would be a good investment on their part. So when I rebuilt this thing, I did go ahead and I tuned all the diffs and everything. I will say the center diff had nothing in it, like not even grease. So that was kind of concerning. I wasn't too happy about seeing that. Like most companies, even Arrma, they say they have oil-filled diffs or whatever. Well, even Arrma, all they do is put a little bit of grease in their differentials. They don't actually tune them for us. But I would have liked to see at least a little grease in there. I don't know if that was just kind of an overlook, because the front and rear had plenty of grease. There was like quite a bit. It took a while for me to like clean it all out of there. I had to take the spider gears out and everything, get some degreaser in there, you know, clean it all out, let it dry out, and then I went 50K in the front, 200K in the center, and then 20K in the rear. But that center diff was kind of concerning because it had zero lube in it. That is something that I would like to see Team K.O.R.H address. If you're not going to fill the diffs with silicone oil, actually tune them, at least put some lubricant in there. Like I said, the front and rear diffs had plenty of grease, a lot of grease in there, but that center diff was completely bone dry. So that's something I wanted to point out. But again, you would find that same thing in Arrma. The V4, I tuned the diffs on my V4 and there was just a little bit of grease in them. So, and these things, Arrma and Team K.O.R.H both say they come with oil-filled diffs. Now, grease is not oil, but hey, that's not my department. Okay, so as I said, I did have a few issues with this thing. And I mean, that's going to be with any RC you get. I don't care who makes the kit, like, what the kit's based on or whatever. If you drive it, you have fun with it, you're going to have issues here and there. Now, I had range issues with this thing. That was just a fluke. It was a problem with the radio. They squared it up with me. They sent me a new radio and everything. So let's just get to how I feel about this kit. Okay, so is this kit perfect? No. Is this kit worth buying? Yes, I think this kit is worth buying. I think this kit is definitely worth the $530 you pay for it. While not being an Arrma outcast and having all of that aftermarket support, I think this is a solid contender. And I'm just gonna say it like right now. I like this truck, and because I don't have an Arrma outcast, I'm going to keep this truck. This will be part of my collection. I'm not gonna sell this truck after this review. So with Arrma and now Team K.O.R.H coming out with their lineup that everybody's calling, copies, basically Arrma copies, this is my thoughts on that. And I'm going to give this truck, before I get into that, I'm going to give this truck a solid B. Now, the reason I'm not giving it an A is because I did have issues with it, and it does need some stuff out of the box. But if you do a couple small things, very cheap things, that chassis brace cost me 12 bucks. It cost me a couple pieces of Gorilla Tape to do the tires, to vent the tires. And if you're gonna be getting a stunt truck like this, odds are you know how to do a little bit with RC. So just plan on, if you get one of these, plan on the wheelie bar bending. I'm not even gonna fix it anymore. I'm tired of fixing it. It doesn't seem to matter because I drive on dirt. I'm not worried about speed runs and all that stuff. So as long as this thing drags on the dirt, it'll do wheelies for me. So I'm not worried about that. And I'm just gonna give this thing a solid B because it does need a little bit of work. But this is where I'm gonna get into my thoughts on Team K.O.R.H versus Arrma, right? So I have had an Outcast. I've had every version of the Kraton except for the 4S and 8S version of the Kraton. Now, I got the Arrma Kraton V1 right when it first came out. Right when it first came out, I got the Arrma Kraton V1. And everybody told me that thing was going to be junk. Everybody was telling me it's going to be junk. Nobody's ever going to make parts for it. The ESCs are catching on fire. The servos go out constantly. They have bearing issues. The chassis bend, all of that stuff. I was told all of that stuff. And I actually had a few things happen to me. And that was back when Hobbyco owned Arrma. So my ESC, while it didn't catch on fire, it wasn't waterproof. I took it through some water. The ESC shorted out on me. And it took me like 2 months to get the new ESC from Hobbyco. So I took the ESC out, I sent it into Hobbyco, and I was waiting. And finally, I just said, screw it, and put my own system in it. And back then, nobody made upgrade parts for Arrma. So I broke my rear chassis brace like 3 or 4 times. Like I said, I bent my chassis 3 or 4 times, and I just straightened it out. I never bought a new chassis for that thing until right before I got rid of it. but I just straightened it out. And like I said, the rear shock tower bent on me over and over again. The rear wing mount broke over and over again. I had bearing issues. The bearings went out on me over and over again. So that stuff just kind of happens. The V2 wasn't much better of the K.O.R.H. I mean, I love the K.O.R.H. Everybody knows that watches my channel, but they're not without their issues. And even to this day, they have chassis issues. You know, even on the 8S, like I said before, the 8S, if you watch Aussie RC Playground's video on what happened to his K.O.R.H. 8S, they can't even pinpoint where it happened. The chassis just buckled in on itself, even with that huge, you know, center chassis brace. So, you know, the fact that people see I had some issues with this truck and they're like, oh, you know, if you would have gotten an Outcast, none of that would have happened. You know, this is just a copy of Arrma or whatever. This is my thoughts on that. Okay, so if you're wanting to build a lineup of bashers, in my eyes, Arrma is the go-to for ready-to-run bashers. While they're not perfect out of the box, they're very solid rigs out of the box, and you can have a lot of fun before you have to buy parts, you know, if you drive it, if you can drive it all. So if I was a new company, or well, Team K.O.R.H is not new, but if I was a company that was trying to get into the basher market, who better to go after than the people sitting at the #1 spot? I see this as a positive, even though people see it as like they're just copying Arrma, whatever. Yeah, they might have similar names, the bodies might look alike, but they're different. They're different rigs. And I see it as a positive for us, the bashers, the people that buy these rigs, because now there's a little bit of competition. Now, what do I want to buy? Do I want to buy the Dementor or the Outcast? You know, which one's better? So I see it as a positive that instead of us just going for one company, now two companies are going to be trying to compete for that top spot so that people are going to buy their rig over the other. So I see this as a positive that there's going to be a little bit of competition in the market instead of just one company having just awesome ready to run bashers, which that being Arrma. And like I said, I do think Arrma is the top dog for ready to run bashers. Now, are their bashers the best ever? No, you can buy kits, you know, you can kind of throw stuff together and make your own basher and make awesome rigs. But I think out of the box, Arrma has that going for it. But like I said, they're on their V4s. So the K.O.R.H V4, I think this is the second or third lineup of Outcast, you know? So they've had time to establish themselves as a good company. And I think Team K.O.R.H jumping in the mix and going straight for the top, you know, trying to contend with the top dogs, I think that's awesome. I think it's a good thing for the hobby. Regardless of how similar the rigs look, I think it's good for us, the hobbyist. All right, so in closing, do I think this thing is better than the Outcast? I personally like the way it handles better. I seem to have a little bit better niche for driving this than the Outcast. For some reason, I have a hard time driving the Outcast. I had a very good time driving this thing. As you can see on my last bash video, my last 6S bash video, like this thing was just smooth, just going on 4S. And like I said, I'm definitely keeping this thing. I do give this thing a B rating. I definitely thumbs up it. This truck is fun. Like I said, I'm gonna keep it. I'm gonna drop a link down in the description below where you can get this thing from HRP, or you can get it from RC Explosion, which is where I actually ended up getting this thing from, because I was just surfing the net and I found it on RC Explosion. I actually ordered that front chassis brace that I need from RC Explosion because it was out of stock everywhere else. And they called me the next day. Like, they called me the next day to like tell me, look, sorry, we thought we had some of those. They have sold out. They're sold out everywhere. Do you want a refund? Do you want to be put on back order? So they are a very, very good company, you know, to give me a call right away like that as soon as they find out that they don't have the part actually in stock. So I got to wait for that. Maybe I can find some kind of, you know, homemade upgrade like I did for the rear. But I like this truck. I think this is a very solid truck. Like I said, I don't feel the need to tune the suspension. I like the way I love the way it handles now. That I've vented the tires. I've addressed that chassis bending issue. I think this is a solid truck. And I would like to see some people pick this up because I want to see Arrma and Team K.O.R.H competing for that top spot for ready to run bashers. All right, everybody, hopefully this video was entertaining and informative. If it was, please smash that thumbs up. If it wasn't, please go ahead and hit that thumbs down. Stay tuned to Killer Off-Road Hobbies. Subscribe if you're new here and click that bell, and we'll see you on the next video. Until then, peace.